Well, hello there. You're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with the columnist and broadcaster Steve Richards and the former Conservative Special Advisor Salma Shah. Welcome to both of you. With us from now until just before midnight. Lots to discuss. So let's take a look at the front pages then, starting with the Metro. An image of the rescue of a man from a burning building in Reading dominates the front page of the Metro. The Financial Times, meanwhile, leads with the record net immigration figures and says Rishi Sunak is facing mounting political pressure. That is also the main story for The Telegraph, which reports the PM's cabinet colleagues want him to act. The Times reports the Treasury was alarmed by the revised immigration figures. The Eye claims there's a battle in Cabinet with the Department of Health clashing with the Home Office over the demand for a crackdown on care worker visas. Suella Braverman saying the record levels of net migration are a slap in the face to the British public is the main story for the Daily Express. The Mirror's front page features an image of the Prime Minister with the headline, "Make it stop," and claims the Tories are breaking Britain. The Sun reports Danny Cipriani has joined Strictly's Christmas special days after his marriage split. And finally, The Star claims daft boffins fear they might have created killer robots. Well, a reminder, by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers for yourself while you listen to our guests. So let's head straight to Steve Richards and Salma Shah. Welcome to you. Migration figures, absolutely fascinating. The British public with multiple questions. You know, who are these people? Why are they coming? And are they likely to stay? Do we know the answers to those questions, Salma?
On these figures, no, that's not going to give us that sort of level of detail, but nonetheless, they are interesting questions because they always play into bigger economic questions around what does this mean for jobs, what does this mean in terms of UK skills, what does this mean in terms of infrastructure and service delivery and the pressures that are on service delivery. So I think those overall figures are incredibly frightening to a lot of people, especially because we were supposed to be in an era where we were having lower migration as a consequence of Brexit.
Yes. I mean, I was talking earlier about David Cameron promising tens of thousands. You know, here we are into the 700,000. You know, what in people's minds has gone wrong? Or is it a good thing because we know we've got a shortage of people to fill the very many vacancies this country has?
Yeah, the fact that you're asking these questions, which are slightly contradictory, just shows how complex and layered it is. There is an issue, which I think will be the main one around in the coming days, of trust. Because, as you say, Cameron promised that, he never got near it. But the referendum on Brexit was all about taking back control of the borders. And then the December 2019 Tory election campaign was partly about getting immigration down. And then we get these huge figures. So there's an issue about trust because politicians pretend all the time that they're going to get them down. And yet it's much harder than that. But so there's a trust issue, but then there's also the substance issue, as you and Salma were suggesting, which is, well, hold on, are lots of people coming here because we need them to fill the gaps in the labour market? And that thing you highlighted, the clash between the Department of Health and the Treasury, is not the Treasury, the Home Office, is one vivid example.
But it's interesting that you say trust, because we're looking at the front page of the Financial Times. We've got this huge immigration headline, and right next to it, you've got a right-wing leader in the Netherlands who's just claimed a victory. And those things are very cleverly juxtaposed on the front page of the FT because this is what we're facing, that sort of challenge, you know, where the right wing are going to talk about the tsunami of asylum seekers and immigration.
Well, I mean, this is your specialist area, Salma, isn't it? Because you worked in the Home Office under Sajid Javid when he was Home Secretary. You know, what were the sort of competing problems and issues you had there in order to try and, you know, submerge the migration figures while still actually get people in who need to do jobs, even if they're seasonal workers, for example?
Well, the whole idea around the immigration white paper that we put forward, which was changed substantially under Boris Johnson, was that we would be picking and choosing the kinds of people that we wanted in to fill particular roles.
Did you want a points-based system at that
No,
time?
we did. So a points-based system changes the immigration system to favour the person who's choosing to come here and puts the power in the individual's hands, whereas the system that we essentially had was about the government deciding what the economy actually needed. And so, as Steve rightly says, on the front page of the Eye, you're talking about that clash between the Health Secretary, well, not the Health Secretary, the Health Department and the Home Office. And that is an old discussion and a clash that's always happened because the NHS really needs those support staff and it doesn't get it in the UK market. The numbers thing has always been, difficult because David Cameron set out that tens of thousands target. It was never reached, and for a long time, people talked about the free movement from Europe, and that was one of the big challenges around the Brexit debate. I think the issue now is we've come out, we don't have free movement, but the numbers are still going up. Why is that? It's because we're now seeing really what we need in terms of skills in the economy, and because freedom of movement isn't there, and we're logging it for the first time, we're actually really seeing what that free movement meant.
And we know that Ukraine and Hong Kong have skewed the figures, but the numbers are driven by India and Nigeria, social care being a main element of it, and the health service as well. So is that, as some have suggested, a failure to recruit and pay properly in those sectors of public service, do you think, Steve?
Well, again, this is so interesting, because do you remember a couple of years ago when Boris Johnson was still Prime Minister, there were those lorry strikes and huge petrol queues one autumn when he was Prime Minister. And he said, this is great news, because we're going to have to recruit within Britain, wages will go up, and this is all part of, post-Brexit Britain. He was sounding actually like sort of Tony Benn, a figure from the left in the 70s and 80s, who used to argue for import controls because people could get paid more here. So there is that argument. However, look at these figures. Clearly, there is a demand for labour that isn't being met in this country. And I wonder whether the trust issue could be addressed if politicians were just more honest about this, instead of pretending it's down to tens of thousands. Yeah. We need these people. We're obviously not getting them now from Eastern Europe as much freedom of movement has gone within the EU. But clearly we still need the people. And that bit is the bit where trust, it seems to me, breaks down. Because if people hear all the time, we're going to take control of the border, no one's going to come here, and then they see these figures, they're alarmed. Yeah. But there are reasons, aren't there, for a lot of it? Yeah,
but I also think that there is an interesting point, which is why are people in the domestic market not filling these positions?
Well,
are we a post-industrial economic power where you no longer do certain jobs? And is it that simple for people, do you think, or not? Or is it simply they're not well paid enough to do it?
Well, that would make sense if we weren't talking about a stagnating economy and the fact that wages are quite low. So you can't, whilst you don't want to have this argument about immigration driving prices down, I think there is truth in the fact that there is downward pressure on wages as a consequence of cheaper labour that comes in. Now, the problem with the fact that we don't have freedom of movement anymore means that actually going through the rigmarole and the process of trying to recruit someone from abroad is a little bit more expensive. So actually, there's this terrible cycle of everything in this supply chain getting that much more difficult.
And that's another layer of this. We're in a sort of flatlining economy where there are actually loads of jobs available. And a lot of sort of economic downturns, unemployment is a big feature. But here you can't move but for seeing vacancies for jobs. But they're not being filled. Yeah,
let's have a look at how the papers are continuing. It's the main story, obviously. The Daily Telegraph as well, cabinet pressure on Sunak to slash migration, quoting the new Conservatives group of around 20 MPs, failing to deliver on this issue is more serious than failing to cut taxes or taking too long to build hospitals. Mass migration is changing the nature of Britain forever. So that is a community cohesion question. Yeah. Daily Express, failure to halt migration is a slap in the face for the public. Suella Braverman, who's forgotten she was Home Secretary until recently, clearly. But the question is, I suppose, if you're seeing 750,000 people coming in, if they didn't come in, would we not need to build 300,000 new homes on, Britain's green and pleasant land? That's how, some in the Shires might be asking this question.
I think that's too rudimentary to make that sort of comparison. But where I think it is really important that we engage in this debate is around that that public service pressure question, but also that cultural cohesion question. Because for far too long, I think we've ignored the fact that people are very worried about this, and in certain communities, people are very worried about this, and it's allowed this to become a real sort of political dividing line. So whilst I think the former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, it's quite rich that she's talking about a slap in the face for the public, because it was her responsibility until literally weeks ago. I think if we don't address the fact that actually there are cultural issues that come as a consequence of immigration around people adapting to a British way of life, whatever that might mean for a lot of people, and the fact that there are pressures, then I think it's going to be problematic.
Steve, I know you want to continue. We haven't even got to the prospect of a snap election, which we'll do in a moment. And also coming up, it's not big and it's not cleverly. The Home Secretary denies swearing in Parliament. Back in just a moment. Well, welcome back. You are watching the press preview. With me now, Steve Richards and Salma Shah. One for you, Steve. I know you're interested in this. I shall read the Telegraph headline. Snap election speculation as the Treasury mulls an early budget. Take it away.
Yeah, I think this is interesting, because I doubt if Sunak has a clue when he's going to hold this election. But he wants options next year. And therefore, the Telegraph piece is about bringing the budget forward, possibly. It's normally in March. Speculation that might be earlier, although they then say, no, it will be in March. And obviously this was triggered because the national insurance cut is coming in January rather than the start of the new financial year. That doesn't mean it's going to be May. It just means they want as much of this kind of stuff to filter through as early as possible, in the hope that May just becomes an option. But it could still well be the autumn. I think that's much the most likely time. But the reason why that's significant, it's on the front page of the Telegraph, is that Rishi Sunak has the privilege of deciding when this election will be. He's also got the hell of trying to control this narrative. So whenever
I thought you were going to say control his own party then.
Well, that is another layer of this story. So whenever he's interviewed, when you do him on Sky, when he's on other outlets, he's going to be asked, so what about May? Will you rule that out? And if he says no constantly, that will stir, oh, he's thinking of May. And then if he then doesn't do it, he looks weak. So although he's in control of when he decides to call it, he's going to lose control of that narrative if it's on the front pages already.
I feel like Gordon Brown in 2010,
yeah,
don't you think?
Exactly,
for that one? In the meantime, Mr Cleverly, our new Home Secretary, getting himself in a bit of a pickle.
Yes, he has used some unparliamentary language, and there is some discussion about whether he was referring to an opposition member's constituency or the actual opposition member himself. And the Home Secretary is saying that he used derogatory language about an individual and not about a town. And as you can imagine, the town of Stockton is in uproar as a consequence of the fact that he may possibly have used some bad language about it.
The question was, why do so many in my constituency, how many children live in poverty? And the suggestion was, he said, because it's a... God, I really should say it this time of night, shouldn't I? Can't really, it runs in the morning. Quick word as well from The Guardian, if you don't mind, looking ahead to Gaza. The ceasefire to start this morning. Obviously, we're looking at Friday's papers here. So, hopefully, after a 24-hour delay, it will, Steve. Yeah,
it looks like it. It was a bit nerve-wracking this morning when we heard there were problems. You thought, well, problems tend to lead to more problems. But it appears to be going tomorrow. And then very quickly the question will arise, and then what? But obviously there will be this good news story tomorrow morning unless it all goes wrong again.
Yeah, but obviously as a consequence we're seeing more intensive fire in Palestine at the moment, so that ceasefire cannot come soon enough.
OK, both of you, thank you very much indeed. We will see you for the 11th. Steve Richards, Salma Shah, thank you. Here's the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, an increasingly northerly wind will make it colder for most this weekend, bringing extensive overnight frosts. Before then, northern and eastern Britain will have a bright and quite cold start tomorrow. A raw wind will limit any frost, though. Southwest, much milder and cloudier. The morning will be quite sunny for most of us, a stiff northerly wind bringing gales and hail and snow showers to exposed eastern coastal regions.
The weather, Sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, our press preview continues after the break. The Tory backlash for Rishi Sunak over record net migration. That and much more on our news review and press preview with our guests in just a moment.